It's true. Actions do indeed speak louder than words. However, City Skylines 2 is no longer pausing these weekly posts as we were told last week and leading up to it the week before. In fact, they've done a complete flip-flop, and now they're back, returning the weekly posts, the word of the week, in a slightly different shape. There's some interesting stuff to cover, so let's just delve straight in, jumping back into that quote from Colossal Order. They said that last Monday, they announced that they were, quote, taking a break, end quote, from these weekly posts due to a lack of concrete news, and that they'd come back when there was something to share regarding actual updates to the game, like modding. They then say, on Tuesday, I received a call from Sweden. That likely, of course, referring to Paradox Interactive, the publisher of City Skylines 2. And if I was a publisher doing PR stuff, I'd probably be picking up the phone as well. They say it seems that there was an overwhelming amount of feedback from you wanting to hear from us developers weekly. Who could have guessed that consumers who paid a significant amount of money for a product that doesn't quite work would like to know when and how it's going to? Anyway, where are we and how did we get here? So 3 weeks ago they said, we're receiving a lot of negativity, we're thinking about stopping the weekly updates, maybe doing something else, maybe just not. Last week, as I now misinformed you, was meant to be the end of an era, those updates on pause, until further notice and big updates. And now they're back with a Q&A style instead. They say that they were wondering about the type of information that might be relevant and that they can share freely while waiting for confirmation on updates. So they pulled together some questions, some that are sort of maybe not quite just a sort of quick tweet answer on social media, but instead require a bit more depth and detail. And in this weekly update, we'll be talking about industry, goods, and how the simulation works slightly more broadly. Just before we touch on that though, of course, last week we also received a big patch for City Skylines 2, big not in terms of megabytes, though there were plenty of bug fixes included. My personal experience with it, now that the dust has settled, is not overly positive, I've got to say, particularly on the graphics, simulation, performance improvement front. I saw no tangible benefit. I'd love to know if you did and if I'm in the wrong, so please feel free to shout at me in the comments if I've got that totally off the mark. But my inkling is that patch 1.0.19 didn't do an awful lot for performance, graphics, simulation. They say that more bug fixes will be patched into the game with the first modding support features, that's code modding and paradox mods, as soon as it's ready for the public beta. And they also said at the end of the paragraph that steadily working on the game and bringing improvements to it is now the best way to showcase our commitment to City Skylines 2 and you, the community. I'm not sure why that is now the best way, but nonetheless, I'm not going to get into the syntax there. Overall, fairly positive reflection on the patch from them. Again, I'd love to know how you found it. The first question that they picked out and decided to tackle is around importing and exporting. How does it actually work? And what are the thresholds for exporting goods? They tell us that the city can import or export when sufficient connections to the outside world have been made, i.e. get your railroad, get your ships, roads, whatever. Some city service buildings also require specific resources to operate. Those buildings can import resources from the outside connections if companies within the city can't provide enough of that resource. The city's companies also import or export resources however they see fit, which depends on many different factors. Exporting goods threshold determined by whether the company's able to make more money by exporting, or if it'll earn more profit by selling it within the city. Additionally, when the company's storage goes under 50%, they start to import resources from outside connections. So they are not happy if their base storage is below 50%. In the middle there, they say that the city's companies can also import or export resources as they see fit, which depends on many different factors. Don't really go into the detail on those factors, but that's all right. And that's the description that they give on how importing and exporting works. The next question is around the flow of resources. Okay, so that's kind of the conditions and the thresholds for goods. How do they move? Well, industrial and commercial companies move into the city with some resources, while storage companies start completely empty. That way, new companies don't need to wait for the first resource, transportation, before they can start to operate. They have stuff ready to go. The The companies won't get more free resources after that, so they need those resource deliveries to start to operate properly. They need one or more inputs to work, and they can get the needed resources from the city's industrial factors, or again from those outside connections, right? So getting resources domestically from your own industry, factors, or importing them from outside. The companies use employees to generate production and refine input resources into newly outputted resources, which can then be shipped to outside connections, potentially other manufacturing companies, warehouses, commercial offices, or straight to the consumer. The new resources will be shipped either directly by trucks within or by transporting to cargo terminals, a focus of course, many bugs and fixes over the last few months. All of this stuff, really. They say that cargo terminals finally can transport resources within the city and to outside connections. So don't forget, you can use those domestically or to export goods out of your city. If that didn't make a lot of sense, or maybe you're just more of a visual person, they also, thankfully, provide an image. Here you can see an example of Wood's possible production chains, 3 options for it to get it in the first place. You can use a forestry extractor, get it from outside connections, or from storage that includes wood. One of the options sends the wood resource to a sawmill. The sawmill uses wood to produce timber, and that can be sent to a paper mill, which uses timber to produce paper, which is then exported, sent to a warehouse or a bookshop. The bookshop then stores the paper until a customer comes in and shops for it. The bookstore's storage of paper is reduced, and the customer's household gains resources. Households only have resources and do not count individual resource types, so they're not counting the blank sheets of paper that they went to the bookstore to buy. This means that they do not look at how much paper they have, only how many resources they have. Speaking of resources, transportation of them, obviously also very important, and they delve into a little bit of detail here too. Physical goods will always eventually end up being carried by a truck, and trucks don't just drive around for no reason. They need a pickup to be scheduled. When a building spawns a delivery truck to get rid of its resource, to send its resources out, the storage of that building, they say, should go down, but there's currently an issue with synchronization, so the resource is deducted before the truck spawns. They're aware of it, they're looking into a fix. Things should sync correctly in future. Unless there's a flip-flop on that too. No, just kidding. They say it's also worth noting that if the vehicle carrying the resource is stuck, then it will despawn, and those resources are sent back to the owner's building, where it will try to send a new vehicle to forward those resources. So there could be one reason why stuff might just randomly disappear in City Skylines 2. I see you talk about it in the comments, and trust me, I see it myself when I'm recording these clips. Sometimes I'll be following a truck and it'll just whoop, disappear. Speaking of disappearing, there's also a sort of a teleporting, which is aimed to represent online shopping that's taking place in the game. They say that the system tries to always go with physical transport of goods, especially business to business. With citizens, however, the requirement is less strict. They could go to a place and buy the goods, or they can essentially order them through teleport, again, online shopping kind of. They say that teleporting is a secondary option, but sometimes the agents just can't get to the place they would go to buy resource, and in these cases, resources are teleported to their household directly. Also, I hope you enjoyed this strange truck clip in the background. I decided not to edit it down, just to sort of showcase a little bit about resources moving between businesses in cities too. The final question in this week's Q&A, what about if the city has a deficit or surplus of some product? During the deficit, there should be more companies spawning that can produce the resource that's in deficit, i.e. businesses will try and meet that demand within the simulation. If some product is in deficit, it means that citizens and/or companies are consuming more of the resource than the city is producing. In other words, supply and demand. Okay. In that case, the city is importing that product more from outside connections, which can create more traffic. During a situation of surplus, the opposite occurs. When the city is producing more of a resource than citizens or companies are using, so extra products are exported to outside connections. I kind of feel like I just gave an introductory high school economics lesson. Anyway, that's it for this week's Word of the Week. They sign it off by saying, did you enjoy it? We've got some more topics to come back. We'll see you next week. My reflection on it is, yeah, actually, I did quite enjoy it. I mean, you know, some of the stuff perhaps more relevant than others, more interesting than the rest, but I like the depth. I like the detail. I like the fact that they are apparently responding to community questions. I mean, these are definitely questions. It's just unclear exactly where they've been sourced from or who's asked them, that kind of stuff. Perhaps less relevant anyway. And a little reflection from me more broadly, good God. I hope that this is the last flip-flop. The last, dear diary, we're stopping these diaries because they're mean. Dear diary, we're thinking about stopping these diaries because we have nothing to say. Dear diary, we're back, sharing these diaries because we have, you know, I just would love to see a consistent approach to how City Skylines 2 is going to be handled. I hope that I'm not alone in that. I don't mean to sound like a pretentious complainer. I just think it would be best for them, for us, for basically every party involved if there was a consistent message that was being told. And I hope that this Q&A structure, likely to be less controversial, perhaps more interesting to the dedicated player, will be the solution to that problem. I'm not gonna put any bets on though, because I might just be coming back next week wearing another pair of jandals. Until then, I'll see you next time.